in architecture, absolutely visual matters, but they really undervalue the living environment. They're like what it's like for the humans to live there. And I think like air quality and comfort just matter so much more than people imagine.
ProClimber inspires and educates people to create healthy, durable, and energy-efficient buildings to live, learn, work, and play in. Welcome to the ProClimber podcast. This week we're joined by Everett Norris, who looked at the story of the three little pigs and thought, the straw house seems like a great idea. We'll find out why and whether the big bad wolf ever stood a chance. Welcome, Everett. It's great to have you on the ProClimber podcast. How are things going?
Good. It's great to see you again, Simon.
Just to let you know, I really enjoyed watching your Grand Designs program. It was fantastic to see you and Elizabeth and the house that you've built.
Thank you so much.
Now, thinking back in your life, Everett, when did you first realize that building was something that you wanted to do?
I got to help a family friend build their own strawberry house when I was 11. And from then onwards, I was pretty convinced I wanted to build my own strawberry house. It was more around 15, 16 that I thought, actually, that could be a career, like being a builder. You know, when you're a teenager, you go through like a dozen different career options. At one point, I was convinced I wanted to be an architect. And then I found out how much time to spend at computers. So I ended up settling on building. And so I did a much more conventional apprenticeship. And in the moment I could, went back to natural building.
When I first met you, we were out in Raglan at one of your tiny house training programs. Tell us about that. What got you into tiny houses as compared to full-size houses?
I wanted to build my own house. So as an apprentice, I started spending all the money I got from it to buy materials, and then on the weekends would build my own house. So it was sort of trying to push towards having my own house. It wasn't the backyard of my parents, but it was a very enjoyable experience and a fantastic way to learn because you're immediately applying what you're learning. That's the best way to learn, right? Is to learn for a purpose that you can immediately apply. I did that, and then I was involved in the first proper tiny house workshop in New Zealand. And then from then onwards, I started playing more of a role and then started running them for quite a few years. So it was a lot of fun, teaching people how to build their own tiny house in 1 week. It's very much like a introductory to building from scratch because, some of it was related to tiny houses, maybe 20% of it, but the rest of it was just how to build. And it was quite cool to do it almost from principles first, like what are you trying to accomplish? It was good. It was a lot of fun, and I'm hoping one day I'd do it again. But once I started my own house, I got pretty damn busy. So you did it for the fun of it, not for any other reason.
I can well believe. But it was such an awesome group of people that you were getting together, and there seemed to be a huge demand for that, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a really interesting people. I very much like tiny house people, particularly the ones who wanted to build their own house. Very non-materialistic, very down to earth. Very much just wanting to do it for themselves. It was very heartwarming. Sort of what you want to see more of,
Then when did you meet Elizabeth?
We met in 2015 at a natural building conference.
So you were both obviously very, very passionate about this idea of natural building.
Yeah, it was something we bonded from in the beginning. We were friends for many years and then distance for many years. And finally we got to be together. It was a long time coming. It was a very slow burn before we got married. But yeah, it's been very wonderful. Never looked back. Very grateful for meeting her and for her to go on a date with me. That's very nice. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Fantastic. Now, just for our audience, I'm assuming a lot of them probably haven't, they might have heard the word natural building, but can you give us an idea of what is natural building? How does it differ to the standard timber frame building that most people would know here in New Zealand?
Definitions get very tricky because you could class a lot of things as natural that you wouldn't want nearly anywhere near you. I'm more focusing on buildings that are very low toxicity and very low embodied energy, very simple in terms of the ingredient makeup to make. That's sort of all I mean by that. You can stretch it out as far as you like, but I just mean healthy, environmentally friendly houses, if that helps.
So there's a couple of options, aren't there? I mean, you've gone with a straw bale, but there's things like rammed earth, there's hemp houses, you've got earth ships with the tires. So you've got quite a lot of options there. What was it about straw that you liked?
They all have a lot in common. So Elizabeth and I are heavily involved with EBANS, the Earth Building Association of New Zealand. And so we've done it all. I've done all of those styles at some point or another. But the material makeup is very similar. The base ingredients, which is usually a fiber of some kind, a binder of some kind, usually clay, and an aggregate, usually sand or gravel. And that's pretty much how you make all of them. The only difference is just the ratio between them. And so what you tend to see is the further south you go, the building style is more lighter and fluffier. Just imagine way more fiber. And then the further north you go, you start to get heavier and denser. So if you can get it dense enough, it can start to be your structural loading for your house and you don't need any timber framing. Things like straw bale and hempcrete still need timber in it to hold the roof up. There's a bit of it in there. In general, though, I'm just a massive fan of insulation. Even if I was doing something like adobe brick or rammed earth, I'd probably wrap the whole thing in insulation. At that point, once you start wrapping them all in insulation, at that point, you may as well just do straw bale. Some of my friends might shank me for saying that. But anyway, that's fine. Each their own. I love them all.
This might be an obvious question, but you were really passionate about a tiny home. So why have you built this big house?
My wife, it's the true and honest answer. I absolutely loved my tiny house. So context, I was building straw bale houses in the Hawke's Bay with an amazing building company, RM Straw Bale, which had, I would say, some of the best builders in the country. I was incredibly fortunate to be with them. And so that period, I would say, was the best part of my life. And so I was towing my tiny house from site to site, living near or next door to whatever straw bale house we were building. And when we finished, I would tow it to the next one. So it was a pretty optimal existence, ideal work, ideal. And the house was always warm. Like it was perfect. And I had no problem with that. But Elizabeth always wanted to have a house when we had children. And so when we settled down and we were like, okay, we started thinking about having children, it was obvious that the next step was to build a house. But Elizabeth already had a property. So even before we started dating, she and her mother had bought a property up on the hill. And it had covenants. I'm sure you know, like familiar with covenants. Covenants are usually added by developers in rules and restrictions. And so in summary, the rules for our section was something like no poor people allowed. It didn't explicitly said that, but it was no tiny houses, maximum one house, minimum 150 square meters for the house, all of these things. And so every step seems to make sense, but then when you get to the end, you're like, how did I get here? So yeah, we did end up having to build a house that was 150 square meters. We actually ended up even larger than that. We had an original design that was smaller. We kind of got convinced by friends that we should build a little bit larger so the house could sort of be modifiable. It could either be granny flat and us or one big house. So that way we can accommodate Elizabeth's parents, mother or father, coming and living with us later in the future or anything, just adaptable to the situations. It's sort of funny because every stage it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's quite funny because I've had quite a few interviews like saying that you don't need stuff to be happy. You don't need things. And then here I am with a house that's on flipping grand designs. So I don't know. At no point do I feel like I compromised my ethics, but it just happened.
Yeah, these are the things that happen, isn't it? I do watch quite a lot of these tiny house building programs, and I have wondered how easy it must be to actually start a family in a tiny house.
I wouldn't. I know people who have done it, but I personally wouldn't. I think it's just easier to have a house. You don't have to make life that hard.
It sounds like you hang around with a lot of people who are into natural building, but what about people, friends of yours and perhaps other family and things that don't really understand it? What did they think when you told them you're going to build a house out of straw?
They didn't seem to bother so much. The main argument I make is one on health. So a lot of people don't care about the environment. A lot of other things don't really matter. But if you're talking about just wanting a warm, healthy house, that resonates with almost everyone, especially when I've got the skills and the ability to do it. It's not more expensive. It's not different. And so especially if it comes down to the aesthetic, right? So I quite like that rustic aesthetic. If you don't like that look, that's fine. You can dislike my house. I don't mind. We're built for ourselves, right? So I haven't really had pushback from anyone. It's definitely not anyone I've met in person.
So just to confirm, is this going to be a certified passive house?
Oh, it is. It is certified passive house plus Homestar 10, LifeMark 3. It's the whole shebang.
Wow. So you've really, really gone right to the best you could.
Yeah. It was actually somewhat interesting because it turns out when you're building you're trying to build it as environmentally and healthy as possible, and you're building a passive house, getting Homestar 10 is quite straightforward. Context for people, Homestar 10 is the New Zealand environmental building standard. Goes up to 10. 10 is as high as it goes.
So obviously with building a passive house, if you want to just run through the components, sort of the key elements of a passive house and how you've achieved each one of those elements.
You know this very well, Simon, but in general, a passive house is about having a comfortable, warm house, right? So there is a number, 15 kilowatt hours per square meter, but in New Zealand terms, that's 1/10 of a normal heating for a normal house. It's about having a warm, comfortable house, if we're being honest. That's very cheap to keep warm. In the design, things that push towards that, the easiest way to get there is to have a simple form factor, lots of insulation, good solar design, so thinking about your windows and your eaves, and being airtight and having a heat recovery ventilation system. If you're doing all of that, it's fairly straightforward. It's not rocket science. A lot of it's very similar to normal construction. It just takes a little bit more caring about the result rather than just doing exactly what you're told. If you're happy to just do what, focus towards the goal, it's fine. It all worked quite well in the sense that our house was on a mass movement zone, which really forced us to have a quite simple footprint. So we're almost a rectangle. Elizabeth cut a little corner off it to look at the view. But the rest of it is fairly straightforward because the mass movement really means that you pay a lot for the footprint of the house. And so that pushes us to have a 2-story rectangle mostly, which it's very easy to build on mass movement, but then it's very easy to get passive house. The walls are quite thick and we've got lots of insulation floors and ceilings. And so the thermal bridges are non-issue. When you're building out of timber and insulation, straw and wool, when you're 350 mils thick, you just can't. The thermal bridges are almost non-existent. There was very few. Elizabeth had to model it all and it was just a non-issue most of the time. So it was fine. It was easy.
So your airtightness layer in the walls obviously achieved using the plaster itself, am I right? And what about the ceiling?
So the ceiling was in tallow. I did in tallow in the ceilings and then taped into the clay plaster walls. And so the plaster was the airtightness. And then the ply, I just taped all the joints with tape and then taped it to the plaster.
And then you've got a mechanical ventilation system as well, haven't you?
Yeah, a brink unit. They let me do it myself. So that was the main reason I went with them. Trying to do as much as I can myself. It's good. Learn it all.
It's a really great learning curve. I recently installed a steeple in my own house.
Oh, exciting. How are you finding that?
Awesome. I mean, I'm living in an old house. So it's, almost close to 60-year-old house. So it's brick and tile, got lots of air leakage, but still really good having that fresh air, especially in the bedroom at night.
A lot of the energy efficiency more comes into effect once your house is airtight, but it would definitely help with the moisture, right? And so are you finding it that it's worth it just on the air quality, moisture perspective?
Most definitely. I mean, I was measuring even in an old leaky building, I was measuring in my room. If I closed the window and the door at night, which you probably would do in winter, I was up to 2,000 parts per million CO2.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know. Even with that infiltration.
Wow. So you just can't rely on a leaky house. You really would need mechanically.
You can't.
Wow. That's crazy. That's really good to know. I'm going to have to take that on board. I just assumed there was a certain level of, when your air changes at over 15 times an hour, I thought surely that's enough. But no,
mine would probably be 20 or so.
It's entirely dependent on the wind, isn't it? So if it's windy, you get heaps of air changes. If it's not windy, you don't get enough.
Yeah, exactly. So I was quite lucky. My house was quite dry because it's a really warm house, gets a lot of sun. But I just love that feeling of fresh air coming into your bedroom at night. It's just unbelievable. And then I've automated the system. So when I take a shower, it just automatically boosts for 1 hour. So it removes all the moisture from the bathroom.
Yeah, that's great. Honestly, I'm a huge supporter because I kind of think in architecture, the absolutely visual matters, but they really undervalue the living environment, what it's like for the humans to live there. And I think like air quality and comfort just matter so much more than people imagine.
I saw watching the program that you were debating or really wanting to go with untreated timber, but it looks like eventually you had to sort of give in and go the treated route. Tell us about that process.
We built the barn with untreated timber. You may have seen a few snippets of it. We did the garage first. I call it the barn. It's traditional framing, like mortise and tenon, big trusses, beautiful, a portal frame. Really beautiful. The reason it's so beautiful is I was waiting for Elizabeth to get consent, so I just kept on making it more beautiful. But so that's really nice. It was actually a huge pain getting it through council. And there's a thing of like, you want to do everything and try to be as good as you can, but like you have to make compromises along the way. So like our house, we used H1.2 for the internal framing, which I'm okay with borax. It's not too bad, but arsenic has been outlawed in a lot of countries in the world. And so it's somewhat surprising that we still use arsenic treated timber in New Zealand just residentially. We did spend extra to get different chemical formulations that didn't use arsenic. There were sort of other things in other places, but there's wanting to build better, right? Trying to build better by house, the world, New Zealand, etc., but finding obstacles along the way and having to make compromises. Because at the end of the day, we still need to build a house. So it's just a compromise.
So generally with the council, you talk about the treated timber, but generally getting a straw bale house through the city council for approval, how easy is that?
It was surprisingly easy. I was somewhat surprised how easy it was. It's gotten a lot better because in 2020, we updated the earth building standards to include straw bale in the appendix. And since then, it's still an alternative solution. You still have to supply all of the evidence, but this is not the first straw bale house Elizabeth has got consented. And so it was largely just copy pasting the evidence document for our alternative solution and then just following the guidelines. So the earth building standard is quite conservative in terms of its risk matrix. So you can only do a direct plaster in quite low risk areas, and it goes on from there. And so there's a lot of wiggle room. If you just build to the earth building standard risk matrix, you're going to be pretty good almost anywhere in the country.
So what was your budget for building this house, Everett?
What do you mean by budget? We could spend about 540 without borrowing from our parents. We were limited on how much we could borrow because since I was building it, when the bank calculated how much we could borrow, they had to calculate it on one income because I was going to earn nothing for years while building it. And so it was all based on Elizabeth's income, which really put a low limit on how much we could borrow. So it worked out then that we could spend about 540,000, but we did know that the parents were okay lending us money if we needed to. So that 540 wasn't like a hard line. It was more like this would be ideal. So we definitely went over. Last I saw it, it was 680. It's probably higher than that. I wouldn't be surprised that by the time I've finished everything, it would be about 700,000. But I don't think that's bad. For a passive house on the hill, I think it's an absolute bargain, regardless what kind of house it is.
It sounds very, very affordable to me. But then, of course, you guys put in a lot of your own time and labor, didn't you?
A lot. It averaged, I think I worked it out at the final filming, and I think it worked out about 6 days a week, 10 hours a day for over 2 years.
Wow.
And that's me. And then Elizabeth did and a huge amount of work. It was quite funny because I thought myself as a very hard worker. But Elizabeth, she had to do, the consenting, but also then the passive house, the homestyle, everything else in her free time. So she was working full time to maintain the mortgage and then doing everything else like in evenings and weekends. So I honestly, she worked just as hard as me, possibly more. So I'm really impressed with her. She helped me on site as well when I needed it secondhand.
I think you guys have got a great working relationship and it really came across. But obviously there were certainly some things that you also had a bit of a head-butting on, was it perhaps? I believe there was a lot of discussion around an ensuite, wasn't there?
So Let me think this through diplomatically. No, it was fine. I'm not morally against en-suites. There's just a case where it makes a lot of sense to have one bathroom per floor and then everyone can use it. Bathrooms they're the second most expensive thing after kitchens in a house. And so for the same amount of money, you can go a long way. And I was brought up in a large household with lots of kids and parents, and we all used the same bathroom and it was fine. So I guess it's sort of, you get used to what you were brought up with and comfortable with, and it just seemed like, I don't know, we kind of have different backgrounds, right? So it's not like we were poor at all in my household, but I was certainly shocked at the extravagance you can see on the hill. So I just sort of saw it as almost like a high status affluent thing, and I didn't want to be associated with those people. I understand people like it, so it's okay.
Now, talking about the build itself, were there any moments where you sort of got to a point where everything had been designed and planned? Were there any points where you thought, oh, this is not going to work?
More that it could have been easier. So we used the brand's guide on what wind zone we were in. And so on that, we were high wind zone. But getting right before consent, we got the NIWA report on our property to see exactly what we were. And from one direction, we were very high. But that sort of actually pushed us over in terms of cladding and so forth on a lot of things. And so we were kind of quite far down the design process. And so what we ended up having to do is we did the whole the whole house is a straw bale house, and it's plastered all the way around. But on the south side, it then has cladding over top of the plaster. And so on the south side, we're cladded twice. If we caught that earlier, I probably would have built it slightly differently. Still done a straw bale house, but I probably would have done like a wood fiber board or rigid barrier on the south side, straight over the straw bale, and then done building paper and then the cladding, rather than plaster it all and then put a cladding over top of the plaster. So slightly different structure, slightly different style. The end result's exactly the same. I'm completely happy with the house. It was more just like, there's probably a week here we could have saved and a week over here we could have saved. If I did the same house again, I can think of a lot of things I could do to make it more streamlined and easier to do.
So obviously you've done quite a lot of earth building yourself, but was there anything that surprised you? Was it different building your own house?
Yes, absolutely. So I've worked on 12 straw bale houses over the year, less of that, more as a main builder. And so I thought I knew everything, right? I'm like, okay, I've done it all. I've built houses. I've built my own house before. This is going to be fairly straightforward. And I was sort of surprised at how many unique one-offs there were. Like the mass movement for one. Some of the details were different. The joists were cantilevered to be eaves on the outside. And so that changed the details. And so you don't need a lot of changes in the details before it feels like quite a different house than the houses you've done before. They all rhyme. They're all similar. But yeah, I was somewhat surprised at how much it was. And it was definitely a much more of a dynamic of it's a teamwork exercise this time rather than doing it myself or doing it for a client.
It was really cool to see how you got so many of your friends from the earth building community to actually come and pitch in and help you, wasn't it?
Yeah, so a lot of Elizabeth's friends, a lot of my friends. I had friends, fly down, which I don't think you can make an environmental justification for, but it was great. One thing to point out was that I was working really hard. A lot of the weekends I was busy as well. And so most of my friends seeing me was them coming to site. Like the only thing going on for Elizabeth and I for 2 years straight was the house. So it was kind of nice. When there was a thing that like actually many hands would make light work, it was really nice that people who were like, oh yeah, I'd love to come and help for the day. And so we did that quite a few times. There was the bales, there was some of the plastering. It was just a great experience. If just from it's great to see your friends because I haven't seen you in like 4 months.
So having chosen straw bale, do you think that costed you a lot more money, or did it just shift where the money was spent?
Definitely a lot less. It did save me a lot of money.
Oh.
But that is because I was doing the work myself. I wasn't paying for my time. And so the material cost is less, but the time aspect is more. But I wasn't paying for my time. If you were paying for my time, it would have been slightly more. There's a different math when you're building your own house because paying for people's time is much more expensive than paying for yourself. If I earn money and then pay someone to do something, I have to work 1.5, 2 hours to pay for 1 hour of someone else's time. And so it just mathematically is much more efficient to build it yourself, which means that slightly more labor intensive is less expensive than more material expensive. It wasn't that bad at all. But yeah, I guess if it was for someone else, it would be slightly more expensive, but not dramatically. It was definitely, when you're comparing it to other architectural houses, it's cheaper than most architectural houses, largely because of how rustic it is. It's on the lower end of architectural houses, I guess is what I would say.
So what was the thing that surprised you the most when you started living in the house?
How quiet it was. Everyone says this, but it really is, especially triple glazed windows. Our walls are, 450 mils thick with 40 mils plaster inside and out. You just don't hear anything. As well, I did plaster on some of the internal walls with straw clay, and that worked like an absolute charm at stopping the sound. So there's not a lot of sound movement through the house. I guess I was somewhat surprised at how well, it makes sense, right? What they say about sound insulation is you want heavy and floppy. You don't want super rigid, strong things, and you don't want light things. So like a drum's the opposite of what you want. And a pile of dirt is sort of the optimum. It turns out like houses made out of earth are really good for sound. That's probably the biggest thing that surprised me, because I knew it was going to be warm. I knew it was going to be nice to be like. I've stayed in strawberry houses before, but that's the one that surprised me the most.
When it comes to living in the house, how have you found, because how long have you been living in it for now?
Since February, so 3 months now.
Okay, so you've been through the summer. How did you find, because Christchurch gets pretty warm in the summer, doesn't it?
Yeah, so our energy model, PHPP, says we should get 1% overheating.
Wow, that's low.
That's low, but we didn't find any, so it never got too hot at all summer. Maybe it was a cool summer. We'll see. Next year, maybe there'll be a day that's too hot. A lot of things sort of work well together. So the easiest way to build a straw bale house is to do direct plaster where you don't have a cavity. I cannot stress just how much faster it is. You just pump it on, spread it out, done, move on, right? But to do that, you need to be relatively low risk. So normally single level, low wind zone. And in our case, what we did is we had an eave at the top of the house and then a mid eave. But what that means is, so on one hand, it let us do direct plaster, which was much, much easier to build. But also it meant we were protecting from a lot of the summer overheat. And so we're less dependent on our windows for keeping our house warm than most houses. It was just a different style. And so it all kind of works together. I talked about the footprint and passive house before, and now this is the same again with the natural building and eaves sort of playing into the passive house quite well.
My son actually lives in Christchurch. So I think it was 3 degrees the other day. How is it feeling now that winter's heading on?
We haven't turned the heating on yet.
Wow.
I want to turn the heating on, but my wife doesn't because she says it's too warm. So I don't know what to do about that. That's got nothing to do with the house. That's just difference between perspectives. So, I mean, the model says we definitely need to use the heating in winter, but we haven't yet. I'll let you know how it goes once I've experienced the whole winter.
What do you have for heating there?
We have one tiny heat pump. I had all these brilliant ideas on how to heat the house. I was looking at an oversized hot water cylinder with like a radiator, and because I've got a CO2 heat pump for my hot water. So I originally had all these fancy ideas about using that or using all these things or underfloor heating, but all of them were going to be quite expensive. So, 10 plus grand. And the reality is we need heating so little of the time. Elizabeth mathed it out, and it's 2 kilowatts in the peak of winter is the rate. And so when that's a heat pump, that's like a 700 watt heat pump, which is a single room heat pump for the whole house. So we just have this tiny heat pump. It's not even the most efficient heat pump. We mathed it out, and it didn't matter because it wasn't used for, 3/4 of the year. And so it doesn't matter if your heat pump is only 3 times efficient if it's never used. so it was quite funny. There's a little bit of conflict because we have solar, battery, very energy efficient, and a heat pump. And so we've got efficiency from all sides. And so there's a bit of conflict. When you're doing the cost calculation, they're all competing for the same space. So like the more energy efficient house means that solar becomes slightly less cost effective. It's still worth doing, but it's an interesting puzzle equation. And so it all kind of does these things. Although I will say one thing I think makes sense. And I haven't turned the heating on yet, but my plan is I think the house has enough thermal mass and enough insulation. I should be able to retain the temperature overnight. And so my plan is to only run my heat pump off the solar.
Wow.
Or at least in the middle of the day when it's warm, and then just try to keep it over. That's my thought experiment. I'll let you know after winter because we actually haven't used it yet.
Are you actually monitoring the temperatures and humidity inside?
Not yet. I had a Yoo-hoo sensor, which are quite advanced ones, but it seems to have broken just before moving into our house. So I need to buy some more, but I don't like subscription models, so I haven't decided which ones I'm going to get. I want more sensors. I want inside and outside and upstairs and downstairs. So if you've got any suggestions on what are some good ecosystems to buy into, I'm all ears, Simon.
I can certainly give you some ideas. I've got quite a few which are completely, they don't rely on any sort of subscription at all. So I'll share that with you, no problem.
That'd be good.
And is there anything specifically that guests are noticing and commenting on when they visit you?
That it's warm. I mean, all passive houses have this, but it's the surface temperatures, and it's very hard for people to know. But there's this, when you walk into a building and all the surfaces are warm, it feels different, and people do not know how to articulate. They just say, oh, this house is super cozy, or I really like the feel of this house, and they don't know how to say it. Probably the other thing is, maybe this comes across wrong, but it smells quite nice, our house. So we have almost no plastics, basically no VOCs. It's quite the only thing you smell is like maybe a little bit of linseed oil or some, I don't know, olive soap. You don't smell much, right? It's so, people don't really know how to articulate it. They just keep saying this. It's the same thing. Everyone says the same thing. It's just like, oh, this is really comfortable, or this is really I like the feel. And then they don't know, when you ask what do you mean by feel, they don't really know how to say it.
Now, just to sort of summarize as we move toward the end of the discussion today, would you recommend a straw bale build to other people? And who would it perhaps not be for?
So the wall thickness is thicker. So your really high density, it might be a bit harder. But I think that's a little bit overblown in that I would still need relatively thick walls if I was doing passive house. People it's not for. If you don't like the aesthetic, just don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. The honest answer, what really attracted me to straw bale houses like this was the look of it and the feel of it. I wish I could say the environmental, I wish I could say like cost efficiency and all these things, but the truth is I just like the look of them. My wife liked the look of them, and we really like the feel of them. And so if you don't like the look and feel of them, just do what you want. You know, you're very much familiar with the time, cost, quality triangle.
Tell me about that.
In project management, they call it time, cost, and scope. It's the idea that you can't have everything and there's a bit of compromise on your house. And so you pay somewhere. So either you pay in quality, or you pay in time, or you pay in financial cost. A lot of mistake people building their own houses, they sacrifice too much in the time aspect and they let it drag on too long. And then you have a lot of indirect costs not factored in. I have stories about like things left out too long and then getting water damage and then not using it because we bought secondhand materials 2 years before we built the house. So like things like that. So if you're really focused on building fast, you'd probably lose out. I don't think it has to be super slow though. I'd probably just be in the middle, some kind of compromise between time, cost, and quality. If you're prepared to compromise on all three, you'll find something really good.
That makes a lot of sense, Everett. And I really appreciate your time today. And I'm sure our audience is really going to enjoy this discussion and hearing about this fantastic house that you built. And we'll leave links in the description as well for people to go and watch the episode of Grand Designs so they can actually see the two of you as a couple and the whole process of building this amazing house. Thank you very much, Everett.
Thanks, Simon.
Sharing knowledge is at the heart of our strategy to make buildings better for everyone. Sign up for our podcasts to learn more about creating healthy living conditions by protecting building structures from external and internal moisture damage. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to having you with us next time.